So what I'm going to do now is continue with D.T. Suzuki's introduction to the Lankavatara Sutra. This section is called One Buddha and Many Names. All the Buddhas are of one essence. They are the same as far as their inner enlightenment, their Dharmakaya, and their being furnished with the 32 major and the 80 minor marks of excellence are concerned. But when they wish to train beings according to their characters, they assume varieties of forms, appearing differently to different beings, and thus there are many titles and appellations of the Buddha as to be beyond calculation. One noteworthy fact about this, the Buddha's assuming so many names, is that he is not only known in various personal names, but also given a number of abstract titles, such as no birth, emptiness, suchness, reality, nirvana, eternity, sameness, trueness, cessation, etc. The Buddha is thus personal as well as metaphysical. The Lanka here does not forget to add that though the Buddha is known by so many different names, he is thereby neither fattened nor emaciated, as he is like the moon in water, neither immersed nor emerging. This simile is generally regarded as best describing the relation of unity and multiplicity, of one absolute reality and the world of names and forms. So in this section, what Suzuki is alluding to, without saying it in so many words, is again that the Dharmakaya is the body of the Buddha that's beyond all concepts and words, that can't be characterized in any way by the kind of products that are created by our thinking mind. But that from this Dharmakaya, from this law body or truth body, emerges these various forms, both at the Sambhogakaya level, which are the spiritual or cosmic Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, as well as at the Nirmanakaya or form body level, which are the physical manifestations of Buddhahood within the world in the form of human beings who have such sublime characteristics as being consistent with those of the Buddha's Sambhogakaya characteristics of wisdom and compassion. So why does the Buddha manifest himself in these various forms? Of course, to teach beings, because different beings need different manifestations in order to relate to the truth, in order to relate to the Buddha Dharma or the Buddha's teaching. You'll recall perhaps the 25th chapter of the Lotus Sutra concerning Avalokiteshvara, or the regarder of the cries of the world, and how he manifests himself in various forms according to what the needs are of particular beings. If a being needs to hear the Dharma from a king or a queen or a layperson or a Buddhist monk or Buddhist nun or a merchant or whatever, that the Buddhism in the sense of the wisdom and compassion within the cosmos can manifest itself through various personages who may be our neighbors or people that we know in our everyday life. So these 32 major and 80 minor marks, I've never really studied those in detail, but again, these are sort of considered in the classical Mahayana texts as being the characteristics of a Buddha. And in the Diamond Sutra, you'll see the dialogue with Subhuti, where the Buddha is basically saying, can the Buddha be identified through these various marks? And of course, the teaching in the Diamond Sutra, as in all the Prajnaparamita Sutras, is that that the ultimate nature of reality is empty of any individualized marks such as these. But at the same time, as it says in the Heart Sutra, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. In other words, that samsara is nirvana, that to create a dualistic perspective to where you're contrasting being with non-being is also a false kind of dichotomy. And that is what is emphasized in the first section of chapter 2 of the Lankavatara Sutra, where the Bodhisattva is praising the Buddha as being beyond being and non-being. So going on with Suzuki's introduction, the next section entitled Transformation Bodies of the Buddha, okay? These are, as I would understand it, and I haven't reread this section just now, but I assume he'll be talking about the Nirmanakaya, or the form bodies. And he's talking about Trikaya. While the Trikaya, or three bodies, dogma, is not yet fully developed in the Lanka, each member of the Trinity is traceable in such ideas as Dharmata Buddha, Vipaka Buddha, and Nirmana Buddha. The notion of the transformation body inevitably follows from the Buddha's desire to save the ignorant whose minds are not enlightened enough to see straight away into the essence of Buddhahood. As they are not clear-sighted, something is to be devised to lead them to the right path, and this something must be in accord with their mentalities. So here we see the operation of upaya, or skillful means. If not, they are sure to go astray farther and farther. If they are not capable of grasping Buddhata as it is, in other words, the Dharmakaya, let them have something of it and gradually be developed. The theory of upaya, or skillful means, is also the theory of Manomayakaya, or will body. As the incarnation of a great compassionate heart, the Buddha ought to be able to take any form he wishes when he sees the sufferings of sentient beings. The will body is a part of the Buddha's plan of world salvation. This is one of the reasons why Buddhism is often regarded as polytheistic and at the same time pantheistic. But it isn't. All these transformation bodies are for the purpose of helping the person with their suffering, but also providing teaching modalities to where people can be led beyond the duality of this versus that, of me versus the universe, beyond the illusion of self or personality or soul. So the next section gets into really the Bodhisattva and his 10 vows, and Bodhisattvahood, as I've said many times, really is the key path within Mahayana, or Great Vehicle Buddhism. I've characterized the Lotus Sutra as kind of a guidebook for the Bodhisattva, and that's probably true of many of the Mahayana sutras. For example, again, back to the Diamond Sutra, the Subhuti is asking, how should a Bodhisattva reside? And the Buddha talks about he should have a mind that abides nowhere. In other words, to not grasp or cling to any particular conceptual framework or theory as he or she goes about his or her business of saving beings. And by the way, where he talks here about world salvation, Buddhism definitely is a world religion. It's a religion of universal salvation. And frankly, the notion is, as I understand it, is that ultimately everybody will achieve Buddhahood. So it's not, sometimes, people in the West that latched onto the early form of Buddhism saw it as pessimistic because of the first noble truth that suffering is inevitable due to our clinging and attachments. But in reality, and as it evolved, and particularly in the Mahayana tradition, it's tremendously optimistic. There are sutras that talk about hell, like Jiso Bodhisattva. He goes into the hells to save beings, while the hells are, in a sense, our own creation, our own suffering associated with our clinging. But the point is, none of these hells, so to speak, are eternal. In other words, it's not like we die and go to a hell and never can get out. There's no purgatory, there's no hell in that sense, but eventually everybody is saved through the workings of the compassion of the Dharmakaya, the ultimate Buddha body. So the Bodhisattvas and his 10 vows. Vows are critical to the Bodhisattva path. And the vows that are most wonderful in some ways are the vows of Samantabhadra at the end of the flower garland, or Avatamsaka Sutra. I think I've recited those in a previous video. They're very wonderful. But here goes. In Mahayana Buddhism, the Buddha is not the only agent who is engaged in the work of enlightening or saving the world. While he is able to transform himself into as many forms as are required by sentient beings, he is also assisted by his followers, or sons, and I would add daughters, as they are called in the Mahayana sutras. And I really hope that as I'm actually just reciting what's in the Lankavatara through the Suzuki translation, and what was undoubtedly a correct literal translation back in the day, in the original Sanskrit, that we have to adapt and adjust this to cultural evolution. And wherever you hear good son or victorious sons or whatever, you have to translate that in your mind as sons and daughters, good men and women. I hope you can do that mentally and appreciate the fact that, this isn't a gender-specific kind of thing. Look, for example, at Avalokiteshvara. He transforms himself into a woman or a man. And the form of Avalokiteshvara, as you know, actually evolved from a male figure in the early sutras to later in China being a female figure with the name of Kuan Yin, which means the same thing. Avalokiteshvara, Kuan Yin, they both mean regarder of the cries of the world, but the figure became a female figure and one of the most revered and looked up to, and one of the figures that more people took refuge in many ways than any other bodhisattva. Bodhisattva are thus the sons of the Buddha and apply themselves most arduously and most assiduously to the cause of Buddhism. In fact, the actual work of world salvation, we can say, is carried on by these spiritual soldiers under the leadership of the Buddha. The latter is sometimes felt to be too remote, too serene, too superhuman, and his sight is often lost in the midst of our worldly struggles. But the Bodhisattva is always with us, and ever ready to be our confidant, for he is felt by us to share the same passions, impulses, and aspirations which are such great, disturbing, though ennobling too, forces of our human life. So, getting to the Shin Buddhist notion, or the generic Bodhisattva notion, is that the Bodhisattva defers his or her own enlightenment and dives back into the world of particulars, including the world of passions and suffering, in order to be a transformation body to help other beings. To state the truth, sentient beings are all bodhisattvas, however ignorant and ready to err they may be. And here, perhaps he's getting at the notion of Buddha nature, that we all have the Buddha nature, even though it's buried in some people, or even though I think the images of the sun not being able to shine through due to the clouds of ignorance. They, meaning all beings who are all bodhisattvas, are all Jinaputras, the sons of the victorious, and harbor in themselves every possibility of attaining enlightenment. Again, that optimistic perspective. The bodhisattvas who have gone up successively all the rungs of the Bhumi ladder, Bhumi being stages, and who are thus capable of extending their help over us, are really our own brethren. Therefore, Mahamati of the Lanka opens his questions generally with this, quote, I and other bodhisattvas, etc., etc. Mahamati is our mouthpiece, voicing our wants and aspirations. And isn't that a fine way to orient your ear as you listen to the recitation of the Lankavatara? Thus is not the place to consider historically how the conception evolved in Buddhism, whose primitive object seems to have consisted in the realization of our hardship. But we can state this, that the essence of bodhisattvahood is an unequivocal affirmation of the social, altruistic nature of humankind. Boy, I hope Buddhism is right. Obviously, there's a whole lot of bad in the world. But we have to have faith in the Buddha nature and the fact that we do have this kernel within us that has the potentiality for goodness and concern for our fellow beings. Whatever enlightenment one gains, it must be shared by one's fellow beings. This idea is classically expressed in the Mahayana by the so-called, quote, 10 vows of Samantabhadra. Here you go. The bodhisattva is a man, and I'll say, or woman, of, quote, inexhaustible vows. Without these, he is not himself. to save the world, to bring all his fellow beings up to the same level of thought and feeling where he himself is, and not to rest, not to enter into nirvana until this is accomplished, how infinitely long and how inexpressively arduous the task may be. This is the Bodhisattva. Vowing to save all beings, which is technically known as Purva Prani Dahana in Mahayana terminology, cannot, even for a moment, be separated from the life of the Bodhisattva. The Buddha, being surrounded by these noble-minded sons, cannot fail, finally, to release all beings from the bondage of karma and ignorance and thirst for life. With this in view, he is always inspiring the Bodhisattvas with his sovereign power and sustaining them in their efforts to bring enlightenment in the whole triple world. So, what's implied in that last sentence or two is very important, namely, that the Bodhisattvas, even the most advanced in terms of the Bhumi stages, which are articulated, by the way, later in the Lanka, and give great inspiration for those who are striving to become increasingly effective bodhisattvas. But my point being that the bodhisattvas, they rely on the Buddha. They realize that what they are accomplishing, what they are able to manifest in terms of these transformations and so forth, these are a function of their reliance on the Buddha or the Buddhas. And as it's said in the first section, the name is not that relevant. Buddha takes many names. So as I've said before, and as some people might dispute, it doesn't really matter which cosmic Buddha a particular person looks to for their primary refuge, whether again it be Sakyamuni or Sakyamuni's cosmic eternal form, or Vairocana, who's the supreme Buddha within the Shingon or esoteric school, or as it is for me, Amida Buddha, the Buddha of infinite life and the Buddha of infinite light. Light being wisdom, life being compassion. And for us Shin Buddhists, we focus on Amida and the vow that he generated during his stage as a bodhisattva, when he committed himself to study all the pure lands in the universe, to create the best one ever, and to work like heck to be able to accumulate enough merit to be able to invest in his vow the kind of tremendous power that was necessary in order to nullify the negative karmic baggage of ordinary humans, such that if they relied upon him and entrusted themselves in the power of this vow, I will be reborn in his pure land of bliss when I die. Namo Amida Butsu.